Hello, and welcome to Care, Curation, and Collaboration, Art, Archives, and Exhibitions at HBCUs and Beyond toward Radical Imagination. My name is Martina Dodd, and I'm the Program Director of Curation and Object-Based Learning at Atlanta University Center Robert W. Woodruff Library, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Before I introduce each panelist, I would like to remind attendees we are following the Digital Library Federation Code of Conduct. To review, please click the link that will be placed in the chat. We will start this 50-minute session by hearing briefly from each of our panelists in the order that I introduced them, followed by a group discussion, and then we will turn it over to audience Q&A at the 40-minute mark. If you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of the Zoom app. And now I will introduce the panelist speakers by name, title, and organization. To view their full bios, please click the speaker's page in the Zoom events lobby. Please welcome Dr. Melanie C. Harvey, Associate Professor and Coordinator of Art History at Howard University. Savannah Wood, Executive Director of Afro Charities, and our panelists who will be coming on shortly, Erica Witt, Coordinator of Public Services at Leonard S. Washington Memorial Library at Southern University at New Orleans. So I will give the floor to Dr. Harvey.
Awesome. So thank you all so much for having me. Thank you again for the invitation. As museums and archives have been the bedrock of what I've done pedagogically over the last 10 years at Howard. I'm going to share my screen and talk for no more than 5 minutes about the practice that I've developed. So what I really approach archive and instruction across Howard University's galleries and then Washington, D.C.'s museums is this idea of introducing students to the archive as a potential space for them to frame their narratives. Now, I'm an art historian, so I'm always thinking about art historical narratives, but we can broaden that to think about historical, sociological, cultural, broadly. And if I can skip ahead, that really comes from me engaging with Toni Morrison's essay on invisible ink. And for me, I like to introduce my students to artifacts that allow them and use those artifacts as what's bolded to step into a world confident that attentiveness will always yield wonder. And also this idea that, their interaction with the archives empowers them, right, to construct new ways to view the world. So when I arrived at Howard University, I actually immediately took over the James A. Porter Colloquium. And that's one space where kind of the newest research on not only art history, but art practice is presented. As historically, there haven't been a lot of public academic venues for the development of art history. So this is a very important archival collection that we have at Howard. We're currently on the 33rd year of the Porter Colloquium. And so we have recordings, photographs, as well as transcribed lectures at the Moreland Spingarn Research Center. Some of that's also made digitally available on our Digital Howard platform. So I'm also really encouraging my students not only to think about just that written archive, but also the broader landscape of documentation that happens around the production of African-American art history. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just pulling together some of the recent scholarship that has illuminated the new ways that we can form new narratives around art history. And I often teach these in class and really pick apart the methodology behind how we go from encountering an archival document or artwork to how we get to interpretation. And I found these not only the Journal for the Archive of American Art, but also these additional publications to be great instruments for my students as well. To give you an example of very quickly how I use the archives, the Moreland Spingarn Research Center is home to the Lois Mailou Jones collection. So I actually teach a class, Research in Art History, where we spend almost 2 weeks on just the finding aid and what information can be gleaned from just close looking at a finding aid. And I've used her voluminous archive to document a range of artists. So usually I'll have my students pick one artist, they go see that folder, and they report back with important details that allow us then to interpret what we see in the archival object to what then appears in the artwork itself. Okay. And recovering new artists, such as architects. You know, the field of African-American architecture in terms of the history is not as developed as African-American art. And so I often encourage my students to think of other adjacent cultural makers. And this can be recovered in the findings, our collections here at Moreland Spingarn Research Center. In addition to Moreland Spingarn Research Centers, we also use the Archive of American Art located at the Smithsonian, which actually has a lot of digitized collections around African-American artists like Alma Thomas's collection. And more recently, thinking about how Moreland Spingarn has grown, Howard has recently welcomed the Gordon Parks Legacy Collection. And this is a very important collection because it makes us the largest holder of Gordon Parks photographs at an academic institution. And so we're really looking at how this major purchase actually activated a collaboration, a long-term collaboration, we hope, between the Gordon Parks Foundation and Howard University that actually has developed to student research opportunities, funded student research opportunities to process the collection since it's arrived, and also funding opportunities for curation. I thought I had one more slide in here, but I have to note another collaboration that's been really important is our collaboration with the National Gallery of Art. They actually secured a Mellon grant of $500,000 to start a 2-year paid internship project for any Howard student of all majors. And so we're really introducing, again, the museum and the archive as a space for our students to grow. That's it.
Oh man, that's all so exciting. I'm really excited to be in conversation a little bit later. I will share my screen in just a second. Hey everybody, my name is Savannah Wood. I am Executive Director of Afro Charities. We partner with the 130-year-old Afro-American newspapers to make their archives more accessible to the public, with an emphasis on what I've kind of been calling non-traditional scholars, artists, creative writers, K through 12 students. The Afro was founded in Baltimore in 1892 and has been owned and operated by my family since 1897. So this is a family portrait. You see John H. Murphy in the middle and Martha Howard Murphy there, and then their kids surrounding them. So this is one of the founders and their 5 sons. And then you see successive generations operating the newspaper from there. You'll see portraits going up in the background. So art's always been an important part of the Afro legacy there. So I'm in the 5th generation and I'm here managing this archival collection. In 2017, the Afro sold its building on North Charles Street and downsized offices. So at that time, the for-profit newspaper company was managing this archival collection. And due to longstanding relationships with Morgan State University, we were able to move the entire collection over to Morgan's campus for storage, both in a facility that was kind of not in a lot of use, and then also some of it was going into the actual library. So Dr. Ida Jones was instrumental in that as well. So in all these boxes are, approximately 3 million photographs that document the newspaper's 130 years in business. You'll see some of the actual inner workings of the newspaper company. This is one of the earlier offices on St. Paul Street in Baltimore. You'll see there's always been a very large community engagement aspect of the newspaper. This is a boys' camp from 1937 that was photographed outside of that site. And then it stretches into the present as well. The image on the right is from the Million Man March in DC. And in addition to documenting really landmark events that have happened throughout history, there's also just these really beautiful daily moments of joy and leisure, which I love. And in addition to the photographs, there is audio in the collection. There's original political cartoons. So there's really just a wealth of information that's housed here. This image is taken at Morgan. This is actually with some archivists from both Johns Hopkins and University of Baltimore who helped when we were making a move from Morgan State over to the Maryland State Archives. They have a facility that we are now housed in. You know what? I didn't share sound, but it's okay. We don't need to hear the sound anyway. In the next slide, I do have a short video that's showing a digitization project that we have underway right now. So this is Dion Moses and Megan McShay working on that project at the Maryland State Archives using their equipment. And as part of that project, we are using Airtable as kind of like a data staging area to house the metadata for this collection as we figure out what dams this will ultimately go into. Be happy to talk about more of that. Megan McShay has really been instrumental in getting that set up. So this is making our work a lot easier. One of the things that we do through Afro Charities is we have a biannual artist commissioning project. This is with artist Zyveria Simmons, and we worked in partnership with an organization called Caddis to commission her to make a new body of work inspired by the Afros collection. You'll see she's holding archival images and has created these different I don't know, kind of portraits, like performative portraits that were on display in Paris. This exhibition then traveled to Stockholm. And in both instances were opportunities to talk about Black archives in both an American and European context and how they're being used in arts and other ways. This was from 2020, another artist commissioning project. This is our first one in Baltimore. This is a piece by Akia Breon Brown, who took a pamphlet on urban renewal from the archives and created an erasure poem that she then animated on what used to be the old Afro building on North Charles Street. So it was site specific in that way as well. We've had lots of conversations about this artwork, about the archives themselves. This is one that happened in conjunction with Zyveria Simmons' exhibition in Paris. We produced a publication that pulled from our archives to tell the story of Black women in the Baltimore and DC areas that were involved in the women's suffrage movement. So this came out in 2020 to honor the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And then we do a youth fellowship program. This year, we're working in collaboration with Muse 360, which is a Baltimore-based organization that's been operating for quite some time. They've been running a program called New Generation Scholars that's 15 years old. And it's students 13 to 21 who are interested in African diasporic histories, research, and art. And so they kind of had free reign in our archives. This is the archival setup at the Maryland State Archives. An assistant state archivist, Corey Lewis, is pictured at far right. This year, I'm actually in Chicago right now. We just wrapped up a research trip with the students where they got to go to the Stony Island Arts Bank. They got to go to DuSable Museum and a bunch of other cultural sites throughout Chicago to have research experiences in the city. Another partnership that we did recently to celebrate the Afro's 130th was with Philadelphia Printworks, which is a Black woman-owned company out of Philly that produces a lot of wearable materials related to Black history. So we're finding all of these kind of creative ways to get the word out about the archives so that there's more than people with PhDs coming to see us. And there's a lot more curiosity about some of the information that we held in here. Last thing on here that I'll mention is that we are currently creating a new home for the archives at the Upton Mansions, historic building in West Baltimore that's been vacant since 2006. And this will become the permanent home and research center for the Afro Archives. So this is underway and what we're working on now. And we're really envisioning that all of the programs that I just showed will happen within this building. And ideally that there would be a lot of opportunities for students in the K through 12 space, but also through our local HBCUs, Coppin and Morgan, to participate in some of the archival work that we'll be doing on site.
Thank you, Savannah. And let's welcome Erica Witt into the chat. If you would like to briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role and institution.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, let me go ahead and apologize. You will hear the airport in the background. I have just gotten back into the US from Ghana, from a 10-day tour of the country. And I'm just really happy that I could make it back to be with you all. Again, my name is Erica Witt. I am representing Southern University at New Orleans. And we're here in Detroit currently, about to make our way back. But I operate in several capacities at Southern University at New Orleans. My main job title is Coordinator of Public Services for the Leonard S. Washington Memorial Library. I handle everything frontal facing of the library, including the circulation of books, devices, the way that we function with the public, et cetera. I am the curator for our new Southern University at New Orleans Museum of Art. We just opened October 27th, and we are very proud of it. I care for the traditional African art on campus and have done so for almost the past 9 years. And I am a professor of museology. So I teach introduction to museum studies and principles of museology to grads and undergrads. And again, it's such a pleasure to be able to have you here. And you all may see some of my students walking back and forth or hearing them in the background too, because we all went on this study abroad trip to Ghana. But so at Southern University in New Orleans, we have one of the largest collections of traditional African art. And actually for the Southern University system, we have 3 museums. The Southern University Museum of Art in Baton Rouge, which is our oldest, the Southern University Museum of Art in Shreveport, and then of course the newest one, Southern University of New Orleans Museum of Art. I would dare to say that we have probably the second largest collection of traditional African art outside of the National Museum of African Art at the Smithsonian. My role since coming to SUNO as a student in 2013 has primarily been caring for the African art collections and making sure that the students and the community can be able to find themselves in the art pieces. So when I came to SUNO, we were introduced, also let me apologize, because I am traveling, I do not have any slides, but I'll try my best to be animated and try to paint a beautiful picture for you all of our collections. Yes, so since coming to SUNO as a student, I've cared primarily for the African art collections and ended up getting a job doing so on campus. We currently have over 2,500 pieces of traditional African art, mainly from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One of my favorite ethnic groups to study is from the Kuba people, but we do have 42 countries represented in our collections. And I'm currently in the process of turning our campus into a museum, which means we'll have African art in each and every building. This is important because SUNO, we were exhibiting African art as early as 1969. And that's from the earliest in our first yearbook that we collected, but it is possible that we were exhibiting and collecting earlier. Thank you. And my primary role is just to make sure that the artifacts are taken care of, making sure that I am a memory bearer, a culture bearer to give this back to our students to make sure that we show how the traditional African art is relevant. I don't know who that guy is, sorry. How the traditional art is relevant in their lives, especially as students and as African Americans in New Orleans, since we had, we were a enslaved person port, and I want to make sure that we're trying to take this story beyond the narrative that we were given that, oh, African American history started as slavery. No, let's take a look at some of the art. Let's see the masterpieces that was coming out of the continent. Let's see how our people here in the U.S. use those art pieces as a form of heritage and identity. Pride, and as well as to create various modes of artwork. So I typically get everything out in the community, and I can't wait for you all to be able to see the collections too.
Thank you all for sharing the great work that you're doing with your organizations. You all started to share some of the program initiatives and collaborative projects developed to foster engagement and increase awareness of your collections. But can you maybe give us more detail on what made those or other projects successful? And what, if any, challenges have you faced in the pursuit of increasing the access to those collections?
I can start very quickly. I think in the past, pre-COVID, I'm going to be very honest that the collaboration was hard. Now, one of the main collaborative platforms that we actually were using was through the Porter Colloquium. We would often partner with Smithsonian museums to make that happen. But I think we all saw what happened during COVID and the kind of racial reckoning that was happening. A lot of money poured into Howard, and I think there was a push for a lot of these institutions that have been exclusionary to engage us in a profound way. So I feel like it's almost on the up and up now. It's really hard for me to complain because people really are interested, really, I mean, from corporate entities all the way down to other institutions, really just asking us what we need. And I mentioned the Gordon Parks Foundation, but more recently, over the last week, I was able to confirm that Howard University, Moreland Spingarn Research Center, Emory University's Rose Library, as well as the Driscoll Center at University of Maryland. We're actually going to partner together to provide 6 travel stipends for scholars engaged in scholarship on art at Howard. So I feel like we're just catching our stride in the possibility and just opening up what's possible, thinking about how we can pull resources across institutions, but also hold corporate and other foundations accountable, for investing in the future.
We don't have a physical place for people to come visit us at this moment. So in terms of access, I think that's probably the biggest challenge. We are guests at the Maryland State Archives right now, and it's not a facility that's open to the public. So in some ways, there's a benefit there for us in that we have this time and space to work with the collection and digitize large portions of it and start to figure out what that looks like and how we can scale that moving forward, which will create a different kind of access. But I have to agree also with what Dr. Harvey said is that, we have seen an influx in funding, which allows for the type of big thinking, big projects that I talked about earlier in terms of the digitization project, in terms of the building restoration, that cultural center that we're making. The funding opportunities have really allowed for that kind of thinking to actually be, possible. So we're kind of looking towards the future for that. In terms of collaborations that have been really great so far, because we don't have a physical programming site of our own, working with organizations has been really important in order to get the work out. So for instance, with the Xiverius Simmons collaboration, the organization Caddis that we worked with put up a substantial budget to help with that, but also shared space in order to present that work, and then invited other people in, which opened up a new context for us to talk about the issues related to Black institutions in the United States and how there might be analogies for that within a European context or not, what we can learn from one another. And so it's opened up all these really interesting international conversations through that specific partnership.
For SUNO, in terms of some of the issues, the number one currently is being super short of staff. With the museum opening, it's only myself and the museum director, but he has a lot of things going on. And because my primary job is in the library, it doesn't give much time for us to be open, to be able to create our visitors. So that's something that we're working on currently to try to build that up, especially for the next semester, and making sure we're incorporating our master's in museum studies students to be able to help with that initiative, as well as federal work study students, which I would train to be docents, area guards, et cetera. Another issue, of course, SUNO suffered complete devastation from Hurricane Katrina. We were able to save 50% of our African art collections. In terms of our archives, 75% of it was destroyed. I inherited a collection that was left to sit several years after Katrina, and FEMA really didn't start giving us money to begin to rebuild until I think 10 years later. So I'm only one person to handle all of this. So I'm just taking baby steps when I can to either make the collections upstairs accessible to students, especially with tours, and making sure people set up specific appointments with me personally or with the director personally, so we can make sure that we get them the things that they need. And in the event that I am not there, I can ask my librarian colleagues to be able to, I can give them a script and be able to walk them through and be like, okay, tell me which ones are your favorite pieces, and I can tell you what they mean. And so when people are going to the collections, you can be able to point out which one is which, and you'll be able to remember the story that I gave. In terms of collaboration, we have a great bit of community collaborators. And then we have a few international ones, but our biggest initiative is trying to make sure that we can make the museum, and specifically the African art collections, accessible and usable to all departments. So for example, how can we make our new nursing students be interested in African art? One of those ways, we have these wooden clysters. Those clysters are actually wooden enema bottles. I know, strange and gross. However, they make excellent teaching tools in terms of telling people why you shouldn't touch artifacts, because artifacts can harm you or you can harm it, because we have oils and salts on our hands, or there can be human matter or animal matter on them. Or for our nursing students, being able to talk about the ways in which you can use instruments, medical instruments like this and so on, so they can be able to pull examples from that. So yeah, we typically try to reach out to the community. So for museums, cultural arts centers, whenever they're in need of having access to traditional African art. One of the biggest and best things that warm my heart about it, for example, we have an institution, the New Orleans Museum of Art, which is the major art institution in New Orleans. However, when you go into their African art collections, you can only just see it in a glass. You can't connect with it, right? At Southern University in New Orleans, it is my mission to make sure that people can touch them with gloves, of course, with supervision, of course, but to be able to make that connection, to actually feel them and be close to them. So I'm hoping to be able to expand that. So if any of you all would like some long-term loans or et cetera of traditional African art, or need help into creating a story based on it. And now that I have this this very newfound appreciation with the arts of Ghana, please let me know. I would love to assist.
And if I can piggyback on that, Erica, that was beautiful because you triggered my mind. For the last few years, Howard's Gallery has been working with the School of Medicine and dermatology students to think about how close looking translates across visual arts and medicine. So it's just great to know other HBCUs are doing it. And I'm also excited to hear how, you getting the art out there. Because as you were talking, I was like, conservation. So I can't wait to talk to you in a few years to see how that's gone.
Thank you all. I mean, it seems like there's a thread of ways that people can engage with the collection is directly related to instruction or putting practice in the hands of young students. So this was first for Melody and Erica, but I think Savannah, you can also add to this. What are some best practices you can offer to teaching faculty or librarians who may be interested in incorporating archival or visual literacy skills through the use of archival art collection in their curriculum?
I'll quickly begin. I mean, for me, I've been at Howard since 2012. And this may not be what people want to hear, but it literally took me 4 or 5 years just coming up with like firm lesson plans and how I wanted to use objects and archives that I could then take to my colleagues in the museum. So I'm in the museum and archives. So everything was seamless. But I will say it took me, I spent some incubating years just coming up with the material to make it easy for my collaborators and partners. So best practices, take the time to kind of write out, think out what your exercises is, what collections you're accessing, what you're trying to get out of it, and what the outcomes would be. Hearing Erica talk, here at Howard, we are short-staffed in every way. And so often having that preparatory material, it takes the onus off of our colleagues who are often overextended. So that would be my first note, just the proper planning, don't rush it, and have everything dictated seamless or transcribed seamlessly out for our archivists, the registrars that we would be working.
If you have a short staff, and then she's just revisiting what I previously said, get them interested in, like, figure out what their interests are and then invite them to see certain things in your collection that may go along with that interest and really make it fascinating. So I'm not sure if you all have heard of this organization called Museum Hack. They're based out of New York, but Nick Gray, who used to be the CEO and the founder until he sold it and went off elsewhere, they have these things called Renegade Tours. So they'll invite people to the museum, and instead of having like the boring museum experience, because let's be honest, a lot of people think that museums are boring. Some are, but I want to try to recreate another way of looking at them better than being boring, right? But he goes off and he has like these different tours that focuses on certain things, but they make it funny, and they be able to create a better narrative of each artifact, of each piece. So I would want to invite people to do that, to learn the story, but also figure out a way to narrate or weave your own story into it while you're telling the story of that piece, because then it gets people really interested. Those things it will stick to people more. I also try to relate each piece to other people's lives. So again, talking about the enema bottles, like, okay, who has a high fiber diet? All right, let's be honest. And then, it's like a joke in a sense, but at the same time, people are like, oh yeah, she right. I do got that problem. I got it, whatever. So I just try to make it as fun and engaging as possible. So that would be one of my best practices in terms of helping people to get interested in, thank you so much, in terms of helping people get interested in learning about the art or the archives.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, when we're working with young people, oftentimes we'll ask, like, particularly because the Afro has been around for so long, we'll say, like, what's your grandparents' names? Like, you can do a search for them, like that's an entry point. So try looking for their names, see if you can find them. Try looking for the school you went to. Try looking for the church that you went to, like all of these different institutions, and say, start there and then see what you learn from reading that article. And then we can find some other keywords and see if we can find any images related to that, and then kind of make it like a scavenger hunt. Obviously there's limits to some of that. Like with some of the students, we're able to actually physically bring them to the collections, and we will right now let them just go through and try to find these materials in the collection. If we're doing more of like a Zoom, kind of thing, we'll just pull up some ways that they can search on ProQuest, or looking through images that are already available on Getty Images. And, they have access to ProQuest with a library card. So it's, there's all these access points that are free that they can start with. And then we show them how to your point, Dr. Harvey, make that request in a way that's streamlined, so it doesn't put a lot of strain on us internally for reference services. But we do provide a lot of reference services as well. So in terms of best practices, we want to make sure that people know that the collection is there. So we're using all different types of ways to get that word out. The collaboration with Philadelphia Printworks is one way that we did that. We know they have a huge network of people who are interested in Black history. So that's one way to tell people, hey, look, the Afro still exists. It's 130 years old. And here's the story of this archive that exists as well. And people who aren't necessarily looking into archives. So it might be something that sparks a little bit of curiosity. Or, on our Instagram page, Dion Moses, who works with me, she did this really beautiful campaign over the last month that was highlighting Black women within our archives that we had scanned through our digitization project for our Women's History Month. And she's just giving tidbits about all of these different women who have ties to Maryland, and sharing images from that project. So there's just so many different platforms that we can use to get this information out. And for us, again, it's really important that it's not just in scholarly formats, but that it's in lots of different digestible ways that kind of pique curiosity and make you want to dig deeper. And I think images in particular can do that in a way that sometimes text doesn't. Making short videos can help with that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we've been starting, is like, how do we tap into popular culture in order to draw more people in, and then, continue to uncover what's here. And part of the way that we uncover what's there is by showing what can be done with these materials. So with the project with Iberia, for instance, or the projection that we did on the windows in Baltimore, all of those are examples of like what can be done with these materials. Even in the book that we did, like all of those things are creative interpretations of those archives.
Thank you. So Savannah, you mentioned earlier your partnership with Morgan. What are some opportunities you think there are for more HBCUs to authentically partner with community or cultural archives? And Melody and Erica, what are some opportunities for PWIs or corporate funding organizations that could partner with CARE?
We have had a long-standing relationship with Morgan, so there's been a basis of just trust and community between the Afro Newspaper Company and Morgan State University for decades at this point. So it was amazing that they opened their doors to let us come in and use space in that way. But there was also a mutual trust that was there. So they, set us up with an office in their library and said, use these materials, go for it, and it was mutual because one of the students there was also studying preservation techniques. And so she would help with some of our preservation work. She got hands-on experience working on these things. So it was kind of this back and forth that was really lovely. I think I shared an image earlier of several different archivists. Those archivists were from Johns Hopkins and University of Baltimore. They have a project called Inheritance Baltimore that they're doing right now, where they're working with lots of different Black organizations and archives throughout the city, particularly Black churches was one of the places that they've been working with, trying to make sure that their collections, they have a roadmap for how to deal with their collections. So you bringing trained archivists in and training archivists simultaneously by working with these things. I think HBCUs could theoretically do more of that if they had, the funding there for that. It would be great to see a lot of library students or people who are interested in arts or archives being able to get trained by working on community-based collections. So kind of replicating that program in some way would be fantastic. And not to answer the next question you asked, but it could be that it's a partnership with an HBCU and a PWI to do that kind of work, depending on the proximity and what makes sense for those organizations. But we definitely benefited from having that additional woman power, to help us get that move done. And I think everybody who was working on it also really benefited from being able to see what types of things were in the collection to understand better what resources we had there.
I think to address your question about authentic collaboration. That's really tough. I'm not going to lie. And I won't name the institutions, but there are a lot of major archival foundations and corporate entities that, especially like around COVID, like right before COVID, and then right after that, were actually, I felt like very insensitively approaching HBCUs, saying, hey, we can provide you with the tools to digitize your collections, but we're going to keep the copyright. Like, to me, that is not authentic collaboration. That's actually exploitation. And so I think in a lot of ways, a lot of HBCUs are still moving from a position of caution because, yeah, we have to understand what exploitation means. Also, what these legacies mean to the HBCUs that have safeguarded them when no one else really cared, And so all I can say is keep your eyes open because there are a lot of big name institutions that Howard has had no issue saying no to because, it takes away our authenticity. It takes away that tradition that we've held on to. And I think even going to the digital realm, it's also touchy. There have been questions about how we if we're going to digitize things, like for instance, we actually have the photo morgue for the Pittsburgh Courier. So how do we make that available, but in a way that still necessitates people to come to Howard for the work? That the digital object just doesn't exist without its rooting at Howard. So those are kind of my cautionary, and I know I think I'm saying I'm highlighting the problems, and I think these are problems that we're still figuring out how to work through. And even to a certain degree collectively, I think about the Alliance for HBCU museums and galleries. And there also is an HBCU Alliance of libraries. And I would imagine that these are the conversations that happen when we all get together, right? And think about what it meant when this company came to you or, or this foundation. So.
Can I jump real quick? Jump in real quick for 1 second. I just wanted to say that, yes, we're definitely thinking about all that too. And one of the reasons why it was so great to be able to work with Maryland State Archives is because they led by saying, we don't want to keep anything that you're going to make here. If you want deep storage backup, we can do that and make it not accessible to anybody, and you can decide the accessibility for this. But they led with that, which, you know, I think in terms of how do you foster authentic partnerships, that's one of the things. Address the thing that you know is going to be one of the biggest issues that we've seen happen over and over. Start there and say directly what you will or will not do with these materials.
In terms of SUNO, we still have some partnerships to foster. We're currently, well, we're one of the folks, one of the HBCUs that is working with a predominant PWI in terms of making our collections and archives accessible. However, I'm happy to be going through this process with other HBCUs and their practitioners because they're able to ask the questions that I probably haven't thought of yet. In terms of, okay, well, what are you going to do with the metadata? What amount of labor do we have to give? You know, what funding sources do we need to start thinking about? And honestly, in comparison to their funding, you know, we don't have that much that we can do in terms of that. So it feels good to be in a cohort of other people who are also facing those similar issues. But as of right now, my biggest goal is to finish installing things from the museum, getting our collections, and I apologize, our flight is about to board in a bit. Making sure that our collections are safe and sound. We're trying to recover documentation that I can from that was lost in Hurricane Katrina or having to redo things, which is always an everyday thing that I'm having to do. But yes, I will entertain other, getting other institutions involved in terms of helping out. I just need to make sure that all of our ducks in a row is, you know, before we do it. Because I would hate for someone to come over and be like, oh yeah, this looks great. And then they do something and then take credit for it. And, you know, then it becomes a weird red tape issue. And yeah, later on down the line. But for right now, it's making sure getting everything back to where it needs to be and making sure it's accessible to the community first, physically, and then we're working on digitally later. Also, I'm sorry, one more thing. If I have to cut out, I'll probably do this if I have to go ahead and start boarding soon. But the lady at the counter said that she'll let me know when it's time for me to go. So she's going to give me the thing. And if I'm doing like this, you know, that's it.
Well, thank you. I'm going to start opening it up to Q&A. We do have a few comments. So someone mentioned earlier today in the keynote, Dr. Lopez Matthews stated to make sure to read the terms and conditions of the contract. And I think all of you guys are touching on that, that a partnership should be fruitful for both parties and that the terms that are agreed on are transparent and understood. Someone also mentioned, I think this is for everyone in the call, but particularly for Erica, it might be helpful for know. So the comment said, amazing work that you all are doing. I'm in awe. Not really a question, but more of a suggestion of funding opportunity and capital projects for your archival and museum collections, such as building, restoration, and purchase of furniture and storage materials. So the NEA's Infrastructure and Capacity Building Challenge Grant is something that you might be interested in, and we can also put that link in the chat. So a question we have is, what are some ongoing challenges when curating and in creating exhibits that you think needs to be in conversation with other things going on or other things in the collection when thinking about the future of your institution?
Well, I'll start. I think mine is pretty basic and it may shock people, but we actually don't have a lot of exhibition space at Howard. We have 3 adjacent galleries for our art collection, which has grown and massively recently with the acquisition of Ron and Patricia Walters' collection. And we have a gallery in our library. But to be honest, when we think about what 21st century galleries need to look like with temperature control, all of these security, all of these things. Not all HBCUs have that. And so that's one, and it's even thinking about just bringing traveling shows, right, to campus that will augment what our collections do. A lot of HBCUs are still in that process of just standing up and having the things that they need in their exhibition spaces. So that's the first thing I think.
We have this biannual commissioning project that we're doing with artists, specifically inviting them into the archives to make new work inspired by it. And for me, in this round, the challenge is the building going to be done by the time we want to put their work up? And so figuring out just, how to balance the needs of the funder and those timelines, and how to balance the needs of the artists, and having an actual, date in mind, knowing that construction deadlines are unwieldy, and trying to figure out, what's plan B if it's not in our space. So space is a concern on our end also, just thinking through that.
And I think to add to that too, I think it's a question also of where would you value experiencing the art? Of course, we all want it on the campus in our spaces, but on the flip side, there are a lot of institutions that reach out to Howard for loan agreements to have works at a National Gallery of Art or at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So, a lot of it also is as HBCUs are slowing down and really coming up with like a long-term plan of how we grow ourselves and where we want our art to operate. Bye, Erica.
Thank you.
Bye. It's been an honor, you all. If you have any questions, my email is in the chat. You all are amazing, and I'm so proud of everything you all are doing. I hope that we can talk again soon. And I look forward to speaking with you all. Thank you.
Safe travels. Keep up the good work, Erica.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. So I'll just close us off with one more question. I'm interested in hearing about feedback you received from students or young people who have engaged with your collections in different ways. Even what does like new scholarship look like for these students when they are dealing with the materials in the collection?
I guess I'll quickly talk about it. So one of the first places that our students intern at Howard either is at the Howard University Art Gallery or at the Moreland Spingarn Research Center. And so one of our art history, I'm sorry, you all, people are probating. So if you hear yells, I will try to be louder. And one of our art history seniors right now has done 2 years interning at Moreland Spingarn Research Center. And it really has opened her up, a lot like you, Martina, to think about the role of art administrators in libraries. And so she actually just got accepted to Syracuse University's library science program. So I'm increasingly thinking about how those transferable skills, right, that art history brings to the table and allows our students to pivot in different directions. And this same student, again, has spent a lot of time in Lois Mailou Jones's papers, and will be presenting at Porter Colloquium next Saturday, her research on Delilah Pierce and Peter Robinson. So to be honest, you are, for me, I get very tingly because I see the immediate result in 4 years that happens when you empower a student to enter the archive and make sense of what they see in the archive and how that translates to like real research. Like literally this morning, she did her run through of the program and was citing scholars, and I had to hold back tears. So, it really is about getting them into the archive early and giving them that confidence that they can make meaning of what they encounter. So.
We don't have students built in, so we're recruiting people to come to see the work that we're doing, which and the engagement is there's turnover every year. And so the engagement is like a little bit more limited, but I've seen a lot of students get very excited by being within the collections and have had a lot of them ask like, do you have some jobs for me? Like, can we come and work? And so I think, this will shift a little bit once we have our own physical space to work out of, where our hours can be a little bit more flexible than the Maryland State Archives can be, where we can actually have after school programs there where people can come and work on the collection rather than being focused on 7 to 3 Monday through Friday, which is admittedly very difficult for students to engage with. So excited to see how that all evolves once we're on site.
But I kind of also want to speak to something you mentioned, Savannah, and some things that I've seen even at Emory. One of also the most promising things that I've seen recently, like in the last 10 years, is how archival spaces like yours, Savannah, are really opening up to artists in a profound way. So hearing about your project with Zavarius Simmons, that's so encouraging. And I know down at Emory University, Dr. Clint Fluker did an amazing art installation around the Camille and Hatch Billups collection. So, I mean, again, I'm encouraged by even beyond the scholarship, how we really are extending this to artists to make visible in certain ways what the archive does.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank you so much for being here, giving us such rich understanding of what you do, and hopefully some tips and ideas that people can bring back to their institutions. I want to thank all the participants who attended our talk, and I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your day and the last session of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.